Yes, we are live. Hello. Wait, hello, everybody. Welcome to today's live stream. Live chat with Uncle Leong Hian. And today we have with us Roy Ng. Roy Ng, can you say something?
Hi, hi everyone. Can you see me? Hi from Taiwan.
Let me just check. Where's this the first time we're using Zoom, so I'm not sure whether can we see them. Oh yes. I think yes. The when Roy speaks, the screen will switch to you. So yes. So Roy, we see that this is the 7th day of your fundraiser, and you have raised over $125,000. That's 87% of what you have aimed to raise. So what do you think of this the result so far?
I'm actually very surprised. I think first I would like to thank everyone for supporting me, for remembering the advocacy that I was doing on the CPF, and many people are supporting because they felt that because I spoke out on the CPF, there were some changes to the CPF, and that's why they feel that they have to contribute to support what I did in the past. I think some people also said that they might not agree with the approaches I took, and looking back, I think there was a bit of desperation in the sense that I saw some information on the CPF that I felt that I wanted to share, and that might have made me quite anxious to put it out there. But after this 5 years, there has been some growth there. Yeah. So, but in any case, I'm really grateful to everyone for supporting. It has surprised me. It is beyond my imagination, and I'm just very grateful.
So you have never thought that you could raise such an amount, but you were inspired by Uncle Leong's success in his crowdfunding, isn't it?
Yeah, when Uncle Leong was doing it, I was actually very supportive because I felt that it was a way for Singaporeans to crowdfund to support Uncle Leong as a form of resistance, as a form of message, to send a message to the government that we should not persecute people who ask questions or speak out. I felt that there should be better platforms where we can discuss this. And I mean, to be honest, what Uncle Leong did was he shared a post which was not even written by him. It is grievously unfair what happened. Yeah.
So someone from the live chat asked, if you're successful in which would you would likely be successful in raising the full sum in another couple of days, would you come back to Singapore?
In the past, what has made it difficult was the fact that if I went back, there is the threat of bankruptcy hanging over the head. So lifting this would allow me to be able to finally go back and see my parents, my family, my nieces, who I miss a lot, and my nephew, whom I have never met before. I think the other thing that's difficult, though, is that it would still be difficult to look for a job. When I had to leave, I applied to big MNCs, even for jobs, but it was quite difficult. So I think I would finally have the opportunity to go back to visit my family and to meet up with friends and people who have contributed to this campaign. That would, I think, at the very least, be what people are helping me to do right now. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so you would be coming back to meet your family and friends, and also to thank the supporters. However, the circumstances still remains that even if we were to look for a job here in Singapore, many employers would be hesitant to offer you a job. Would you say that would be the case?
I think that would still be the case. But having said that, I am very surprised by, first, how Singaporeans are coming behind Uncle Leong and I for this crowdfunding campaign. And I think from the last election, I was making a lot of comedy videos. And I think there has been so many changes. People are speaking up. People are willing to, what I understand is they're willing to say who they voted for. They are not encumbered or scared by that. And I think that's a very positive development, something that even 2 years ago I did not think would be possible. And it has made me so proud, so hopeful, that we can see that change, we can see that possibility of moving towards a different form of government or society to move towards a a possibility where we can actually debate about policies without being afraid that we are not saying the right thing.
Over the past few days, I believe you have the time to recollect what transpired back when you were sued by the Prime Minister. Have you also looked at the results of what followed your articles on CPF issue?
Yeah.
As in, many questions were being raised in Parliament following the public outcry over the issues that you highlighted in CPF. Some might not be that right, but then a lot of tension was drawn into CPF. Did you see any positive outcome, or positive or a negative outcome from this discussion?
I think maybe if I could go back to why I started talking about the CPF, I had gone to some forums in the past, in 2012, 2013, say hardware zone forums, where I saw that people were saying how the CPF was invested in the GIC and Temasek holdings. So at that time, I did not have factual basis to, believe that that is true, because it was not displayed on the government websites. So I wanted to do my own research as to whether that is actually the case. So I actually went through a lot of government websites, on the CPF, on the Ministry of Finance websites, on the SGSS websites where the government bonds are, to look for all this information. And then that was when I found scattered information that the CPF is invested in the government bonds on one website, and then the government bonds being invested in the reserves on another website. And then on another website, I saw how the reserves were invested in GIC and Temasek holdings. So these were 3 separate websites. And that was when I was thinking to myself, why did the government not use one website to put all this information together, so that there is clarity to Singaporeans for that? When I decided to start writing about this issue, I wanted to bring it to public attention that this is happening, and we should perhaps ask the government to have greater transparency. I think my concern at that point was that there were elderly Singaporeans who were still working as cleaners in food courts and hawker centers, and that why was that the case? The CPF at that time was inadequate, and if we could understand better how the CPF was being managed, being invested, we could perhaps advocate for higher interest rates, so that there will be more adequate CPF and our elderly could retire. So that was the basis as to what I was writing. And when I was sued, that particular article that I was sued for also discussed that issue. Yeah. But I think what I found quite, after I was sued, I continued writing about the CPF even in the days after I was sued. So about a month after I was sued, the Minister of Manpower at that time, Tan Chuan Jin, and the Business Times, they put out an article in the Business Times, and then Tan Chuan Jin on his Facebook, that the CPF was invested in the GIC through the bonds and the reserves. And that was when I felt quite, I felt that I was vindicated, because that was what I have been trying to say, that the government should put all this information on one website. And if you look at the government's Factually website and CPF website, they also point to 2014 as the time period where this information was made available to the public. So I felt very vindicated, even though the defamation suit continued. Having said that, I do think that there were some policy changes after that were at least positive to some extent. The CPF interest rates for elderly for their first 30,000 increased to 6%. And there was the Silver Support Scheme, where the government would give $100 to $200 for the elderly, the 20% poorest elderly. So that at least were improvements, and people could withdraw up to 20% of their CPF upon retirement age. But you asking me too about what I think was not as positive, I felt that the 6% interest rate should be something that should be across the board, that everyone on their CPF should be able to earn in order to have adequate retirement. And if you consider people who are earning the poorest 10 to 20%, they're only getting 100 to 250 every month. And I remember that there was the Online Citizen article that did an analysis, and in 2018, the average Cpf payout was only $355 a month, which means that for the poorest 10 to 20%, they might be earning only about $100 to $200 in Cpf. And tag on to this silver support scheme would mean only another, which means a total of perhaps $200 to $300, and that's still not enough. So we need to look at how much elderly Singaporeans actually need at a minimum level, and ensure that the CPF or additional funds can go up to that level. And a research by several professors across the universities in Singapore pointed out that this figure would be about a minimum of $1,300 to $1,400, and I think that is where we should be targeting at. Yeah.
So thanks, Roy, for the answer. So, Uncle Leong, hearing what Roy said, what do you think has changed after Roy's years of blogging, bringing the attention to CPF, and also the point that Roy brought up in terms of increasing the returns for the benefit of the citizens' retirement planning? What's your thought?
Well, thanks to Roy, shortly after you raised the issue of CPF, those age 55 and above were given an extra 1% on the first 30,000 of their CPF. So, all this came shortly after Roy raised it. And what was startling was that before Roy talked about this issue of CPF, the government's position prior to that, in fact, in a reply by a minister to a question in Parliament as to whether GIC managed CPF funds, the answer was no. So if not for Roy, right, we probably may never have the confirmation that yes, right, now we know that GIC manages our funds.
That was Teo Chee Hian, right?
No, I think it was Ngerng.
I see. Who replied?
Who replied no when asked.
That was when he was Minister of Manpower.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah. How about retirement, the interest? Because Roy was saying that, the interest should be across the board 6%. But of course, I think having a fixed interest would be, it's not a win-win for both sides. How much would you say the interest should be, or how should we look at other sovereign wealth funds as to how such pension funds are run?
Well, our interest rate on the ordinary account of 2.5% is probably the lowest of all pension funds in the world, right? And I think, as Roy pointed out, time and again, we need transparency as to what is the annualized return on investing
GIC,
our CPF,
Temasek,
right? I mean, if the government invests the people's CPF and they get, say, 5% annualized return, and then, you take from that the interest that they are paying to Singaporeans, what is the difference?
Yes. It feels really weird. Say, an investment company takes your money and say, I give you a fixed 2.5%. It's okay if I earn 10% and I keep the remainder. That doesn't work that way, isn't it?
Yes, precisely. But of course, you see, the special account at MediSave pays 4%.
Yes.
And the first 60,000, you get the extra 1%. But we never get the bottom line figure. All the CPF accounts, what is the interest rate they are paying? We estimate it's probably around 3.5%. So just give you an example, if the annualized return that derived from investing CPF is 5%, and the weighted average interest rate on CPF is 3.5, and the difference is 1.5% per annum. And we now have 400 billion in the CPF. So a difference of 1.5% on 400 billion is more than $6 billion a year. which in other pension funds would be returned to the people rather than be kept by the government.
By the way, right, just now Roy mentioned that the average TOC basically wrote the article, or the average payout is about $335, $50 a month from the CPF. You actually mentioned to me before that, frankly, if individual were to contribute CPF like $1,000 odd a month, frankly, by the end of retirement, they should get $1 million in the account if the interest is significant enough.
Yes, just to give you an example.
Yes.
If someone starts at 21 years old, and I use the lowest pay probably possible, $1,100 a month, right? And his salary increased at 2% per annum. If the return is 5%, by 65, you will have $1 million. And you go beyond 65 until he dies, you have more than $1 million.
And frankly, if you're talking about monthly withdrawals, means the capital is not touched, isn't it?
No, what it means is that instead of the average being $300,
yes.
If the average person has $1 million at 65, then the withdrawal will be a few thousand a month.
Oh, I see. Yeah, right. Yeah. And it has been also noted that I think by the Lian Foundation survey, that the average senior would have to have $1,379 to spend with dignity, basically. I think the baseline is there. So the average payout from the CPF is definitely not enough, especially and for me, especially for the seniors who have been working in manual jobs. Because these are people I feel contribute more to society and did not get the returns in terms of financial.
Yeah, just to give you the numbers.
Yes.
If you look at $250,000 at age 65, you're withdrawing about 1,000 plus a month. If it's $1 million,
yes,
you're drawing 4,000 plus a month.
I see.
Now, the other thing is that since you're talking about changes after Roy raised the issue,
yes,
right? Not all the changes have been good. Some of them are arguably not so good. For example, in the past, if you have very little in your CPF, they have a minimum monthly withdrawal. It used to be like 250 or 350. In other words, even you have very little, 10,000 or something, they will still give you at least 250 or 350.
There's a baseline payment.
Yeah. But this policy has been changed. Now they just calculate, okay, the amount that they will pay you over a period of 20 or in the beginning was 20 years, then later 25 years. Then there are people who are getting like $100 a month because you no longer pay the bare minimum.
There's no baseline payment.
How little you have.
Yes.
So that was a policy change that arguably was not a good change, but a bad one.
Roy, you're currently based in Taiwan. Are you aware of the system that they have over there?
I think the system in Taiwan is actually very similar to the other pension systems in other countries that where the pension funds are put into a dedicated fund and then invested. Most countries have dedicated fund managers. I think Uncle Leong would be more aware of that, where they actually invest the funds. So Taiwan, as of last year, I think the interest rates on pension funds was about 7 to 8% at least. And I think globally, on average, the pension funds are earning about 7 to 8% in certain years as well. Just to clarify just now that when I said that the 6% of the interest rates that elderly above 55 on their first $30,000, I think it should be expanded to all. I think what I mean is that I think the CPF, we should look at how the CPF is invested, because currently it goes through a very convoluted process where it is put into government bonds and eventually taken into the GIC and accessible by the Temasek Holdings to invest. So we need to take a step back. How do we want to actually look at how the pension system should be managed?
I think before we get the I think we just be clear. The CPF is the money is basically put to the Singapore bonds, right? Yeah, so I think Singapore special saving bonds or something like that. And there's a fixed average of 2.4, 2.5%.
The interest on the Singapore Special Savings Bond is
Globally,
exactly pegged to equal the interest rate that they are paying in the CPF account.
Yes. Yeah, correct. So the thing here is, right, we as the CPF member, we have no decision over or what funds are being invested. Frankly, no lah. I think pension funds basically don't choose who you fund, who you invest in. However, there must be a effort by the pension fund managers to get the best return from your
So in our
pension
case,
fund.
we don't even know what's the return.
Yes. So it is a weird situation where your investment manager say don't have to care about how much we earn. You just take that for 2.5%. Yeah. And just be content with. I believe the government's stand always been if we bear the risk of investing this money. So even if there's a loss, we still pay you to 2.5%. But the reality is, which pension fund around the world would go below that percent?
That is nonsense, because every other pension fund in the world, if the annualized return is 5 or 6%, right? What's the problem when you have a loss in some years?
Correct. Average out. Yeah. Yes.
I think that is a question that we do not have a transparent debate as to how the pension funds should be used. I think if you ask me, we should really be looking at firstly, how should we manage the pension fund? And secondly, what kind of provision, what do we want to provide to elderly Singaporeans to ensure that there's adequate retirement? Singapore is at a level of wealth where we can say that we can provide we can ensure that we create a pension scheme system which can allow adequate pension fund payouts to Singaporeans. So if we say that we want to peg it at $1,300 based on what the academics have said, how should we then look back at the pension fund to reform it to allow that basic amount of retirement fund to be paid out to the elderly Singaporeans? And if the CPF is managed by itself, with its own fund managers, like Leong said, where there might be negative returns in some years, but on average it would grow at a higher percentage, higher interest rate than it is now, we would, I'm quite sure, be able to provide that minimum pension fund of 1,300 or 1,400 to elderly Singaporeans. And that is, we have to look in terms of how to reform the system with the elderly Singaporean in mind, not so much in terms of how much GIC or how much Temasek Holdings should be earning from the reserves and the reserves from the bonds. This convoluted process has to be relooked, in that sense.
Yeah, Roy has made a very good point. We have about 1.48 trillion in the reserves. Even at 5%, you're looking at 74 billion returns a year,
including land sale.
Of course, we haven't even added in the 10 million of land sales every year. That's not counted. But much of this 1.48 trillion reserves is the people's CPF money. Hundreds of billions of CPF money, and hundreds of billions of the difference in interest between what was derived from investing and what was paid to Singaporean in terms of CPF interest. So a lot of the reserves actually is the people's CPF money, and the difference, the return of the people's CPF money. If you just put some numbers to it, since CPF started until now, if the difference between what was derived from investing and what was paid to members is like 1.5% or something, you're looking at about a few $100 billion that, in the sense, has been taken from the people of Singapore.
Do you recall what Loh Tia Kiang asked Taman about taking the money out from CPF and investing it as a separate fund? Do you recall?
I don't really
because I recall, I believe we wrote an article on that before. Taman basically said that the amount is too small for investment, and that's
cannot be too small, because you have 400 billion in the CPF. How can 400 billion be? I don't recall this debate in Parliament, but on the issue of that, if the amount is too small, you have 400 billion in the CPF. How can that be, a too small amount?
Right.
Yeah, I would have to add that the CPF pension fund is one of the largest pension schemes, pension funds in the world, and GIC, CPF is pretty much invested in GIC, and GIC is also one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world. Of course, the GIC has other funds on top of the CPF as well.
Okay, let's see. We are on Zoom, so give me a while. I'm trying. Let me try to do this. Yes. Sorry, the camera is blocking me. Spare screen. Nope. Where's the screen? No, not this. Not this. Where's the screen? Manage. Where's the screen? Nope, not this. Hey, where's the screen? The screen is here. Screen. Nope. Advanced. Oh, I don't know where's that. Okay. Anyway. Let me just read out what Taman said. Okay, sorry. The question from Lo Tia Kiang was, where's that? Let me see. He would not be able. Oh, yeah. So Lo Tia Kiang asked Taman. Taman said that CPF money managed and invested as an independent pool, it will not be able to enjoy the same investment returns as GIC. I would like to know why is it so. So Taman basically said CPF money had to be pooled with the money from the government surplus as well as incumbent assets from the Singapore's reserve to invest long term as to achieve the high returns to CPF members. That was what was said in 2014 when Roy so-called made the discussion of CPF really hot. So what's your thought?
This in my view is illogical, right? You have of course this 2014.
Yes, right? 2014. Yes.
So at that time the total reserves maybe about 1 trillion, of which maybe 300 billion was CPF. So how can you say that? Oh, because I have 1 trillion, I can get a good return. If I separate 300 billion and invest it separately, I cannot get as good a return. That's illogical. That's nonsensical. If you look at the numbers today, the latest, GIC is managing about 565 billion of Sing dollar, 565 billion Sing dollars. And then you have 400 billion in the CPF. So CPF forms the bulk of the GIC's, if you just look at the amount, okay? Yeah.
I think I would like to add that, in 2014, after I was sued in July, I went to the IPS forum to ask Taman some questions on the CPF and how it's invested in the GIC. So Taman gave the same clarification that the CPF is pulled together with government funds and then invested in the GIC. I think, but the issue is that Taman was answering the question from the perspective of the GIC, that the GIC would not be aware, would not be so much concerned as to where the funds are coming from when it invests the funds. But what about the government's perspective? I think it is important that the government actually tells us quite clearly how much CPF, how much land sales, and how much of the other government access funds are pulled together. What is the breakdown, and how this breakdown is channeled to the GIC or accessible by the Temasek Holdings. Such information should at least be transparent, and the way in which it is pulled together or invested should be a decision that Singaporeans have a stake in. And the current conversation is that we do not really have a say in that. And I think the implication is that if we do not have a say in that, and the GIC is able to take funds from the CPF to earn returns higher than what the CPF could otherwise have earned, it deprives elderly Singaporeans from being able to go on another model of CPF fund investment to earn higher pension funds for themselves. So that I think is a crux of the question, why we need transparency, why we need to know what the breakdown is. And the government can account for that. It is not a private matter. Yeah.
See, like Roy said, in a sense, it's the mother of all Singaporeans' problems. We have the highest pension contribution rate in the world, typically at 37%, and we are probably the one
Lowest
of, if not the
return.
lowest right, pension interest rate in the world. You know, so it's not just the problem of the elderly Singaporeans. Every Singaporean is not getting his rightful and fair share to the returns that are derived from investing our CPF funds.
Uncle Leong, would you say that this situation is made worse, right, with the fact that citizens take money from their pension fund to pay for medical premiums, medical insurance premiums, and also pay for public housing?
Precisely. The HDB one is the second biggest mother of problems, right? We have maybe about 300 over $1 billion of HDB flats, right? And at the end of the 99-year lease, they all become worthless. So all the CPF used for these flats eventually, in a sense, would have gone up in smoke, you know.
So unless a CPF member realize the value of the HDB that they stay in prior to their retirement, if not, they would not be able to see their retirement funds in returns. Am I right to say that?
Yes, in a sense, but then now you find that the market is very sensitive. When a HDB flat it crosses more than 40 years old, generally you have to see the price starts to drop.
So it's not a linear kind of drop, but it's
right.
a steep cliff.
Well, I mean, prior to the minister's announcement in March 2017, reminding Singaporeans that, oh, your HDB is 99 years, after that become worthless. Everybody was subscribing to the decades of asset enhancement policy that we were
never dropping property
so from
prices.
2017 March onwards, you find, then they realize, okay, and that's why you see the older flats over 40 years old, generally the price trend stands to start to drop already.
I see. From Mr. Leong, you're a professional finance advisor. Would you say that the problem is going to be worse off for the younger generation if it stays on as the pension system as it stands today?
Primarily due to two factors. If HDB flats continue to increase in price as they do now,
yes,
then people have to use more of their CPF, which will disappear after the 99-year lease. Okay, and of course now CPF life is compulsory for those born 1950 and after. And if they choose the CPF life standard plan, then all the accumulated interest from age 65 will be absorbed into the CPF life pool when they die.
Maybe Uncle, can you elaborate on this point? I think a lot of people are not aware of this.
So CPF life has two plans. So basic plan and the standard plan. The default plan is the standard plan. That means if you don't select, then automatically you get the standard plan. So now a lot of people, even though they choose the standard plan because the payout is higher every month compared to the basic plan. But the difference, the key difference in a way, is that in the standard plan, all the interest accumulated from age 65, when the person dies, will be absorbed into the CPF life pool, in a sense, eaten up by the fund. So I give you an example. Right now, the full retirement sum is 186,000 at 55 years old. By the time 65, this will have grown to about 260,000. So at that point, at 65, 260,000, all the interest from that point onwards from 65 will be absorbed in the pool when the person dies. So for example, the person dies at around 80 years old. The interest accumulation from 65 to 80 is about 160,000. So that gone.
So that money is not paid out to the asset, the estate.
Yeah. Whereas if you're under a basic plan, the interest is still there. So your nominee CPF, your beneficiary, your bequest, right? In the basic plan, the bequest on death includes the accumulated interest. In the standard plan, the bequest does not include all the accumulated interest from age 65.
I I actually, I mean, on your question on whether the CPF right now is, broken down into the MediSave, MediShield, etc. Singapore's CPF system and how it's so convoluted in the sense that it's broken down into all these parts is actually quite a unique system. If you compare it with other developed countries. If you look at even just Taiwan, the pension funds, the healthcare funds, they are separate. So I pay a separate premium into the healthcare insurance. I pay a separate amount into the labor insurance for pension. So there is very clear separation and very clear amounts that you have to pay, and it's accounted for you at each level. And this is not something that only Taiwan does. It's the same in other parts of Europe as well. I think if you look at, for me, the issue with the MediSave and MediShield is that if you compare with other Asian developed countries, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, the healthcare system requires you to only pay a certain amount because the government would cover for the rest. So you only need to pay there's an upper limit for what citizens have to pay. It's only in Singapore where there is an upper limit as to what the government has to pay, which means that the out-of-pocket money that Singaporeans pay could go up to 10,000, which was what happened in 2012 when a question was raised in Parliament that there were more than 2,000 people who had to pay more than $10,000 in a year for their MediSave. In fact, if you look at how much MediSave has accumulated in total balance, the actual medical expenses was only 1% that we could take out last year to use. So if we look at how the system should be reformed to be similar to the best practices in other countries, there is actually enough money for the government to set a upper limit as to how much Singaporeans need to pay, and the rest to be covered by the MediSave or MediShield, which is available inside. In fact, the other thing is the CPF, MediSave, MediShield, and money that is allocated for housing under the Ordinary Fund. There has been a conversation since the 1990s. There was a news article in the 1990s which interviewed several academics as to whether such a system needs to be divided, where the CPF as a pension fund stands alone on its own, the MediSave and MediShield as its own healthcare fund. And for housing, people could either rely on their additional savings if once we remove it from the CPF, or we could have a separate housing fund for that. And that would allow for more transparency, more clarity, and we would be able to retire enough, save enough for retirement, because that amount of money is not taken away to put into housing. So if we could, I think the key question therefore is, how do we go back to transparency? How do we go back to the needs of Singaporeans and to look at how to streamline the system to ensure that there's clarity? Yeah.
Roy, you have made some very good points. The MediShield Life Actuarial Report is not made public. The CPF Life Actuarial Report is also not made public, despite calls have been made in Parliament, in newspaper forum pages, asking for these reports to be made, as public information. And from a cash flow perspective, we're probably the only country in the world that may not be spending any money on CPF pension or healthcare, right? Because the inflows to the government exceeds the outflows every year. I mean, can you find any country where the inflows to the government actually exceed the outflows for pensions?
Basically,
for public housing as well.
Yeah, basically, which country in the world doesn't have to subsidize for medical infrastructure, medical development? Over here, it's really paying the people. Input is more than what they spend.
Yeah, the inflows exceed the outflows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's for Uncle Leong, what's your thought in terms of like what Roy just now said, where you have the payment rate on different level? So medical insurance you pay separately, whereas for pension fund you sell separately. So in Singapore, right, we pay together as a percentage form breakdown. What's the disadvantage in doing this?
Well, the disadvantage is, at the end of the day, if the cash flows to the government exceed the outflows every year, that means, in a sense, the people are paying
More than what they
more,
require.
right? Because the government, in a sense, is not paying anything.
But okay, but the government, the Ministry of Health would say that, we are helping you to save for a rainy day, because if you do not save enough for, let's say, example, in your MediSave, you in time of crisis might not have enough to pay for the sum. What would your counter argument be?
Let me give you an analogy, okay? I'm the father. I tell the children, okay, now I'm going to collect money from you to save money, so that next time when you need to go to hospital, well, there's enough money to pay, right? But every year, the money I collect from all my children is more than the money that I actually pay out for the children's hospitalization.
Okay.
Right? So, I mean, it works very well, right? If you look at the cash flows, but it doesn't make any sense at all.
So again, goes back to
you see, it's very simple. Government pay less, or cash flow perspective, don't pay at all, means people are paying. People are paying more.
So again, goes back to the issue of transparency, isn't it? Because the government, first thing, doesn't tell us the actuary report, make it open, so we know exactly how much is needed to pay for the insurance, and to at least, not to the extent of government having to top up, but not to the point where the government profits from the running of this medical healthcare system.
Let me give you that analogy. It's like HDB, right? Every year, HDB says they lose money because the more flats they sell, the more money they lose. But when you look at the cash flows, the inflow is more than the outflow, because they are paying for the land price of BTOs at market rates. So they say, yeah, I pay for land, but the land goes to another government department. So it's not an outflow. It's still in the same pocket, right? So we are not, cash flow perspective, we may not be spending any money on CPF, HDB, healthcare.
I think on the issue of the HDB, the government in 1985 changed the law to say that they would include land costs into the HDB component. I think it was 1986. Sorry. So that was when the government decided to include land costs into the HDB housing prices at market rates, which therefore increased the HDB prices by double. And that was what the calculation that was done by, I remember it was it Loh Tia Kiang or JBJ did at that time? No, it was not Loh Tia Kiang, sorry. I forgot who it was, but there was a debate that said that the housing prices increased by 2. I think another issue that many people are concerned about when it comes to the HDB is that they are able to use their CPF to pay for the HDB, and some of them are grateful for that. So when I talk about how we should look at streamlining, dividing the system, it might cause some concern to people. But let me give an example. Imagine we have our salary is in the version of 10 balls. So whatever we invest in the CPF could amount to 4 balls, for example. So what I'm proposing here is that could we, each of these balls could represent, a ball could represent retirement, one could represent MediSave, healthcare, another one could represent housing. So if we, instead of lumping all the 4 balls into a CPF and then putting it into a CPF and then dividing it later on into MediSave, MediShield, etc., can we look at having these balls separately and knowing that my money is going separately right now into different components and used separately so that there are no overlaps? A key issue here is that, so if we imagine that we are able to do it, there would be clarity to that. We can then have the conversation, should we be putting money into the CPF so that we have to take it out again for housing? Can the CPF contribution rate be lowered so that there are excess funds on our hands that we can save and pay into housing separately outside of the CPF? And that is a possibility. I think the other possibility people have to understand is that based on the cost of living in Singapore, Singapore's wages are actually comparatively lower than the other Western developed countries at a similar cost of living. If that's the case with higher wages, there is also the possibility of excess savings that we could then put into housing. Did you see what I'm saying? I mean, what we need to look at is to, instead of be captured by the way the system works, such that we are compelled to operate within the rigidities of the system, how should we recognize where the flaws are, where the trappings are, and to allow ourselves to develop a system that would make more sense, you know?
But don't, Uncle Leong and Roy, don't you think that the system is a bit screwed in such a sense that, see, now, right, a lot of the couples, they pay for the what's that, costly HDB flats, especially the 4 rooms and 5 rooms at $500,000-$600,000, with the idea that they're going to pay from their CPF. Because if, right, they are unable to tap on the CPF, which is 37% of their income, and you ask them to pay from cash, their cash payout, which is 60% of that, a lot of them would not be able to afford that sum. Am I right to say that? Because if this was addressed, say 20 years ago, meaning to cap in terms of how much you can use from your CPF, we could have addressed the appreciation of the public housing. But because we let it go so much for so long, you have come to a point where what Roy has proposed might not be feasible, because you're not going to have the price to come down artificially. It's type of market. So yes, right?
Maybe if I could clarify with some of the data. Right now, I mean, as Uncle Leong was saying, the 37% that Singaporeans are paying is the highest social security contribution in the world. If you look at similar schemes in, say, Germany, the interest rates, the contribution for the pension is about 14%, and that is already one of the highest in the world. Those other countries with high pension contributions are about 8-10%. So right now, if we have 37% of this pension, can we divide it to say that 10% is solely for retirement? For healthcare, in Taiwan, I pay about 1% of 1 of my salary into healthcare. So what Singaporeans are paying for Medisave at 8 to 10.5% is also one of the highest in the world. I think, if I'm not wrong, the highest. So we could actually possibly reduce this to 4%, for example, and still have adequate healthcare payments for
healthcare coverage.
So in terms of, instead of 37% that we're paying, what if we're paying 10% to CPF retirement, solely for retirement? What if we're paying about 4% to healthcare? We have excess funds that we have in our pockets that we can then pay for housing. So if we are not comfortable with the idea, we can then set aside that amount of money, say another 10% into housing from our wages. With that clarity, without that overlap, the current system is that we are taking our funds from the ordinary account to pay for housing, and that eats into our pension funds and prevents us from being able to accumulate enough retirement funds, because these overlaps makes it difficult for us to not be able to eat into the different systems. We need to have that clarity.
Okay, before we continue, right? So now it's close to 1 hour. Those people who are just joined us, don't worry. This video is going to be live. Sorry, it's going to be available both on Facebook and YouTube. So you can just scroll back and take a look at what we have said so far. And also at the time, while we are still carrying on the discussion, feel free to drop a question into the chat box. We are actually monitoring the YouTube and the Facebook page as we speak.
Add to what Roy just said.
Yes.
Right? See, without transparency, it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to make policy suggestions,
a feasible policy,
or enter into a debate, right? Because you use Roy's analogy of 14 balls or 10 balls. How do I know which ball to use or where to put it? Because there's no transparency. It's like HDB. right? So often they ask, can you break down the BTO price into construction costs, land costs, and other costs? Cannot. All that they can tell you. So the land cost is charged at the market rates. Now, Roy's example is very simple. In many countries like Taiwan or elsewhere, most people pay a few percent of their income to cover all their healthcare, right? In Singapore, the MediSave, Roy, since you left, the maximum, highest MediSave contribution now is up to 10.5%, not 8% already, okay?
Yeah.
So imagine people pay 8, 9, 10%, right? It's also for healthcare, right? So you compare to other countries, you're using Roy's example, hey, why am I paying up to 10.5% for my healthcare, right? When other people are paying just a few percent. After all, it's still healthcare.
Correct. It
Right?
can,
So the same principle can be applied to public housing and to pension as well, right? Other people, how much of the income are they paying for public housing, right? How much of the income are they paying for pension? But one thing is clear, for Singaporean, we are the number one in the world. Once you add all this up, 37%, the highest contribution in the world.
so it doesn't help that, because a lot of Singaporeans, they have pride saying that, oh, our income tax is low. Yeah, if you were to go Australia, if you go to like Switzerland, their
Your
income tax
CPF is like an implicit tax, because
is
it's
an indirect
inflows,
tax. Yeah,
right?
it takes in your income
Yeah.
and devoids your use.
You must look at everything from cash flow. Okay, okay. Money going out is outflow. Money coming in is inflow. So money going into CPF is outflow. Of course, you get some back.
Some usage.
When you spend, you go to hospital, you pay medical expenses, right? Now, when we say from a cash flow perspective, the healthcare cash flows, the inflow exceed the outflows. We haven't even accounted for the issue of the excess of the premiums to claims for like MediShield Life. Haven't counted that one yet. No? Right? We are just looking at the inflows, right? The MediSave contributions, the interest on the MediSave accounts versus government
the collection,
healthcare expenditure and withdrawals from MediSave for expenses and premiums. We haven't even touched on the issue of the excess of premium to claim on like MediShield Life even.
I think the other way to look at it is for other countries that are using tax, does it pay for the same things as what we use CPF for? So if you look at, say, the Nordic countries, the tax they pay, some of the countries, they have a bit of a social security scheme. But in general, if you look at what the tax pay for, it pays for education, for pension, for healthcare, for retirement. This is what the CPF is paying for as well. So if we do not look at it in terms of whether it's tax or whether it is CPF, if we remove the terminology, they essentially pay for the same social security purposes. And if you compare how much the Nordic countries are paying in terms of overall average tax, what Singaporeans are paying is actually comparable. What we are paying in CPF is comparable to the total tax and social security they are paying. And when you look at it from that perspective, they are actually getting what you consider free healthcare, free education, adequate retirement funds. And they also have unemployment benefits at the same time. But for our CPF, we have to pay one of the highest, in fact, the third highest out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure when you compare it as PPP. The adequacy of our retirement funds is relatively low. And the healthcare and the education, the university fees that we're paying is also one of the highest in the world. So if you remove the terms, whether it's CPF or tax, when you look at how much, what is actually used for, you realize that Singaporeans are paying the same amount of tax or social security, so to say, but not getting that money, not getting the benefits back. Then there's that question of transparency becomes important, because we need to know and we need to account for why we still have to pay such a high expenditure on our own out of pocket when we are already contributing into CPF for that money, which should pay for it without us having to pay excess out from our own pockets.
Roy, your comparative perspective is excellent, right? It's like saying all the people's outflows becomes the government's inflows. But in other countries, all the inflows means they hardly have to pay any more inflows for most things. But for Singaporeans, the outflow, right, is as high, if not even higher, but still they have to pay a lot additional extra outflows from their pocket for many things. So that is the difference. But at the end of the day, how much is the people paying in totality? Okay. In your example, Nordic countries, they pay so much to the government, but very little else for other things. For us, we pay almost as much. Only thing is not called tax, it's called CPF. But then we still have to pay a lot of other things, right? For healthcare, for education, for public housing, for pension.
Okay, can you answer this question? On this point, this commenter feels that it's actually misleading to say that the money from the MediSave account is actually paid out, because the money in the MediSave account still belongs to us, so it cannot be considered as a medical cost. What's your take on that?
The money is yours, okay, and you can only use it for medical expenses, subject to the eligibility and withdrawal limits, and to pay premiums. But yeah, nothing wrong, okay? But you must realize this. What is important is, every year, how much are you paying for healthcare relative to other countries? And for Singapore's situation, despite having to pay up to 10.5% into MediSave, when you need to go and see the doctor or go to the hospital, you still have to come out a lot of your own, because our share of private healthcare expenditure to total expenditure is still about 50%, which is very high compared to developed countries.
I think it dropped for 4.8. I
think it's a 40% government share, and 50% private share. Yeah.
I think I remember we did an article on that. It's a bit hard for us to find the figure, because the public figure includes development costs as well.
Sometimes
it's a bit hard. It's a bit hard.
Because we have some very funny accounting systems. You look at the Ministry of Health website, then they show you, okay, healthcare expenditure, all right, and there's a note below. No? It includes how many 100 million that was spent under the Pioneer Generation, which has already been factored in when they charge off the one-time 8 billion or something, right,
in 2015
to pay for the next 40 years. So actually paid for, already charged in the budget, but it's still included every year.
As a footnote
there, so if you look at the actual cash flows, for this year, the government is not spending that Pioneer Generation amount. No? It's already accounted for in the one-time transfer.
Another individual asked, Claire. Claire asked, actually, I think this is a very basic question, but people who just enter the workforce and just become a CPF member would want to know, if we die, what will happen to the money in the CPF?
Oh, you'll be paid to your nominee or nominees if you're nominated in your CPF. If not, then you are deemed to have died intestate. You go according to the law of intestacy, go to public trustee, they distribute accordingly. Law of intestacy means like, okay, if you're married, then go to the children, go to spouse. You're married, you have spouse and children, equal share between the wife half and the children half. Right? Then you have no wife, no children, then go to your parents and so on. This is the intestate distribution.
I believe I heard that if it falls into this category, which is you don't have a nominee, while it eventually will still go to your estate, meaning according to the system, it will take a long time.
It will take longer, because it goes to the public trustee first, then they will distribute according to the law.
Whereas for, let's say, if you have a nominee, right,
nominee,
it was immediately processed.
The money.
So everyone just remember, if you have not nominated the nominee for your estate, please do so.
And remember, don't put someone who is bankrupt or you think is going to be bankrupt as your CPF nominee.
Then money is not protected. Then money is not protected. Yes. So let's see. Is there any other question? No.
Now, let me give you one perspective.
Yes.
Okay. Over the years, you find that CPF interest rate has, in a sense, gradually been increased. After Roy's issues, the first 30,000 on the age 55 and above, extra 1%. Okay. Before that, first 60,000, extra 1%. Okay. But now you have to factor in under CPF Life, if it's under the standard plan, then all the accumulated interest is eaten up from age 65 and go into the pool. So if you offset this interest that is gone under CPF Life standard plan against the higher interest that you were supposedly
Promised.
you're getting,
Yes.
you offset this, nobody knows, right? There's no transparency. But are you really, are you really getting more interest now?
Right.
When some of the interest will be gone with it? Sorry, my phone. Let me turn it off. Oh, I'm really calling me.
So, it has been 1 hour since we have started the show. Maybe Roy, would you like to talk about your fundraiser? Do you think that you will get the amount in another 2 days?
I,
How much do you have outstanding from your fundraiser?
I think I actually have to check. As of 6 p.m., I have people have helped to contribute about $125,000, and there is about another $19,000 that is left. Yeah, and thank you. I mean, I hope that this chat with you has helped people clarify my intentions and to help them realize that I do care about the CPF, and that's why I'm talking about it.
So Roy, in 2 days time, you will hit your 144,000. You can buy an air ticket and come back for a holiday already. We look forward to welcoming you at Changi Airport.
Still quarantine.
I hope so. Yeah. I hope so.
Oh yeah, you come back quarantine.
Yeah.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But in any case, I would just really like to thank everyone again, because I didn't really know that the CPF advocacy that I did, and actually Uncle Leong did as well, would actually impact on people. It has just really touched me that after 5 years, people remember the advocacy I did, or if it was for something else, that they felt that what happened to me was not fair in the whole scheme of things, because I was asking questions about the CPF. And I realize now that, being away, that there has been some growth in Singapore in terms of people realizing that they could speak up, they could ask questions, that they could be empowered to do that. And I think them supporting Uncle Leong and I now for this crowdfunding is an example of that belief that they can be empowered to, or feel strong enough to make that change. And being away, it feels really good looking back at Singapore and knowing that this is happening, that there is that hope. When I left, I did not see that, but now looking at the election last year and this crowdfunding support the movement, it just gives me that much hope for Singapore and Singaporeans.
Roy, you have done so much for Singapore and Singaporeans. Roy Ngerng, the king of CPF, right? Return our CPF. Roy Ngerng and Han Hui, who organized the Return Our CPF protests at Hong Lim Park, are the only people, Singaporeans in history, to have been charged and found guilty for having an illegal protest in the only place where you can legally.
No, they were just
protest,
outside. They were just outside.
And
they were just outside the boundary.
Your protest in June, Return Our CPF, June 2014, was, I understand, the largest turnout ever in the history of Hong Lim Park. 6,000 people turned out,
Yeah.
Right? So, Roy, you have really a great son of Singapore. Okay? You've done so much for Singaporeans. Even when you're Taiwan, you're still writing, you're still researching.
So, Roy, would you continue to write on CPF?
Yeah, the last article I wrote in relation to Singapore was on wages in February in the Newslands, the Newslands International in Taiwan.
So Roy, you continue writing, but will you continue sharing on Facebook also?
Well, that depends on what I share and the
No,
implication.
what you say? Will you share on Facebook a news report from a news website without any comment?
I have to be careful about that because you never know what might happen.
Well, even you say that, then lie already lah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. In any case, thank you everyone for joining us today for our fly chat, and thank you Roy for joining us as a special guest. And probably we could actually have more of this like 3-person
Yeah,
kind of forum.
it's wonderful. We get this Taiwan perspective, you know.
Yeah.
You know what? We only pay what? Did you say how many percent on healthcare
1%.
compared to us? You know, the pension fund return was what, 7 or 8% compared to us.
Okay.
You know, yeah. I think it's
Well-
very good when we have this sort of comparative, figures.
I will quickly clarify that the health premiums is actually about 5%. But
Okay.
the government and the company takes up a huge bulk, which means essentially I only pay about 1%.
I see.
Oh. So of the 5%, the government and the companies actually pay about 4%. But so your out of pocket is actually about 1% only. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. The
Okay.
premiums we pay, yeah.
Okay. So yes, it has been over an hour since we have this chat with Mr. Leong Hian and
your dinner already?
what? No.
So you can go eat.
yeah.
You always never eat.
So for those people who join us or just has not heard what Uncle Leong and Roy said, you can just go back and look at the videos that's available after this live stream on Facebook and YouTube. So thank you everyone and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.